Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for bearing with us while we sort out some technical matters. Good afternoon. I'm Alan Solomon, Dean of Tufts University's Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to this conversation with Michael Steele. It's part of Tisch College's Distinguished Speaker Series. Moderating today's conversation will be Professor Debbie Schildkraut, Chair of Tufts University's Department of Political Science, which is co-sponsoring this event and with whom we collaborate on many Tisch College events. In spite of the challenges of our socially distanced campus life, it's been a great year for the Tisch College Distinguished Speaker Series and Civic Life lunches. We're glad that these events have given members of the Tufts community a chance to connect with each other and with the broader world. And we're honored to have hosted guests like Stacey Abrams, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Chris Wallace, and earlier this week, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood. During the month of April, we'll be featuring, among others, former Director of Communications in the Obama White House and Pod Save America's Dan Pfeiffer, the first couple of New Jersey, Governor Phil and First Lady Tammy Murphy, and a true legend, renowned conservationist, Dr. Jane Goodall. Please go to tischcollege.tufts.edu/events to see dates and details for our full lineup of speakers and to register for these and other events. At Tisch College, we pride ourselves on presenting a diverse array of speakers, diverse in their professional roles, their contributions to civic life, and in their politics. In the past, we've featured Karl Rove and David Axelrod, Senator Susan Collins and Senator Tim Kaine, William Crystal and Neera Tandem. We also strive to showcase leaders who bring expertise and perspective to some of the most pressing and complex questions facing this nation, this world, and our democracy. These days, one of those questions is certainly about the future of the conservative movement and the Republican Party. And today's guest is uniquely qualified to provide some insight and perspective to that question. Michael Steele is a conservative political commentator and an attorney who served as chairman of the Republican National Committee from 2009 until 2011. He was the first African-American to ever serve in that role. He was also the first African-American to be elected to statewide office in Maryland when he served as the state's lieutenant governor from 2003 to 2007. A longtime leader in Republican politics, Michael was a founding member of the Republican Leadership Council and previously chaired GOPAC, an organization that trains and supports Republican candidates for state and local office. As chairman of the Republican National Committee, Steele oversaw a successful 2010 midterm cycle in which his party broke fundraising records, picked up 63 seats in the United States House of Representatives, along with more than 600 state legislative seats across the country. An attorney who specialized in corporate finance, he also founded his own company, the Steele Group, a business and legal consulting firm. Steele has long been a sought-after political commentator who currently serves as an analyst for MSNBC. And he's a frequent guest on shows like Face the Nation, HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, Comedy Central's The Colbert Report, and The Daily Show. Since 2018, he's been a senior fellow in international and public affairs at Brown University's Watson Institute. And most recently, as a self-described Lincoln Republican, he was a fierce critic of former President Trump, and in the 2020 election, he formally endorsed President Joe Biden. Joining Michael Steele for this conversation is Professor Deborah Schildkraut, chair of the Tufts University Department of Political Science. Professor Schildkraut is an expert on American politics and political psychology. Her research is focused on how the country's changing demographics shape public opinion. She is the author of Americanism in the 21st Century, Public Opinion in the Age of Immigration, Press One for English, Language Policy, Public Opinion, and American Identity, and the challenge of democracy, American government in global politics. At Tufts, she teaches courses like the politics of ethnicity and American identity, political psychology, public opinion, and political representation in the United States. Debbie is a jumbo who got her bachelor's degree at Tufts and her PhD from Princeton University. She is a great friend and colleague of Tisch College, and we are fortunate to have her lead today's conversation. Debbie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alan, for that fabulous introduction. And thank you to the Tisch College for asking me to do this today. And thank you, Mr. Steele, for taking time to be with us and talk with us about politics and your life and your journey. So I'll be asking you questions for a little bit, and then we'll save some time to open it up for questions from the audience. So people, if you have questions, people who join us today, and thank you panelists or participants for joining us today and taking time at the end of your busy day to hear our conversation. If you'd like to ask a question, you can post it in the Q&A feature in the Zoom. And before we begin, I just want to say that I am participating in this event from my campus office, which means that every 20 minutes or so, when I don't get up and walk around, the lights go off. So if you see me at any point waving my arms, I'm not trying to get your attention. I'm just suddenly sitting in the dark and I want to get the lights to go back on. All right, so with that introduction, welcome. And I'll ask my first question, which goes back to your childhood. You grew up as a devout Catholic, and after you graduated from Johns Hopkins University, you entered the Order of St. Augustine, where you studied for the priesthood. And so I'm interested in what led you to pivot towards politics and public service. Can you share that professional journey with us?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Professor. I really appreciate it being a part of this conversation with Debbie and Alan. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here on campus. And I just spent a little bit of time with a few students beforehand, and it was just great getting to know them a little bit and have a conversation. Yeah, for me, it's kind of an interesting journey indeed, because the idea of politics and religion, it kind of centers itself in the Catholic Church, and they seem to do both pretty well. But the fact of the matter is, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I'm always surrounded by politics. As we like to say when I was growing up, our local news is national news for everybody else. And so we had a very different perspective on the impact of things and how politics really can be a major disruptor or a major, sort of coalescing point for communities. And so that's always kind of been in the back of my mind. Growing up in my parish in Northwest DC, getting to know the young priests at the time and just sort of walking that journey. Politics was never kind of a part of that until much later in life, obviously. But as I was telling the students earlier, that part of my journey was foundational. It was grounding. It was very, very important because it set for me how I would ultimately come to view the world and how I would experience the world, how I, do find the water's edge where things aren't any longer political, that they are in fact about people. And you have to be able to respond to the needs of people and a community. So the church really was foundational in that. And when I entered high school, the Augustinians taught at my high school, Archbishop Carroll High School at the time. And I just loved the Augustinian ethos and what that story was all about. And that further shaped this idea of service and this idea of what God is calling me to do as a man and how I can, live up to that call. And so entering the monastery was one way to do that. And it was, again, as I said, very, very important, very, very foundational. And then coming out on the other side of that experience after about 3 years, then applying it to everything else I did, became very, very important to me. And as an elected official, for example, it animated how I saw my job and how I needed to respond, not as the lieutenant governor, not as the Republican, but as a public servant.
Great. And continuing with the question on the early years of your political life, you grew up in what you called a monolithically Democratic community, and you said you were raised as a Democrat. So what led you to the conservative side of the spectrum and made you decide to change parties as an adult? We know there's a lot of political science research that shows that people are often the same party as their parents, and it sounds like that isn't the case for you.
No, I didn't have it that way. No, my mom and dad were both Roosevelt Democrats. They still are to this day. Mom is 93, dad is 89, and yep, they were very much involved and had opinions about the 2020 election, which they shared. But yeah, my mom at a very young age, for me, told me to be an independent thinker. Now that's a blessing and a curse, to be honest. There are times in my life where that aspect of my personality serves me well, and then there are other times where not so much. But I try to bring that to everything as well, because that's what Mom taught me. She taught me, don't be a follower, be a doer, be a leader. If you're required to be in the moment. And so when my first presidential election was 1976, I was 17 years old, turning 18 the October before the November election, so I could get to play. And I remember spending the spring and summer talking to my mom about it, what I wanted to do. And while I was raised in a Democratic household, I had one aunt who was a Republican, and no one talked to her. So I did not, I was like, well, that seems very, very lonely. So I would call my aunt up sometimes and I would talk to her and ask her about it. And she'd just go, don't pay them no mind. Just pay them no mind, right? Do what you want to do. And my mom reinforced that. And so I decided, after she said, go out and, don't be a Democrat because I'm a Democrat or your dad's a Democrat. Go out and find out for yourself who you are. Discover that for yourself, because that's who you're going to have to be to everybody else. You can't be me. You can't take on my philosophy or my ideas and as your own. And so I learned the history of both parties, and I spent time. And then what I realized was, despite what the trend was at that time, and certainly what it is today, that the Republican Party was the political home for African Americans. For over 100 years, Republicans voted for African Americans voted for Republicans the way they vote for Democrats today. And I wanted to understand that more. And so I realized that it was Black ideas and Black hands and Black politics that helped shape this new forming party that was born out of the Whigs, known as the Republicans. Guys like Frederick Douglass, who worked very closely with guys like Abraham Lincoln, helped shape what this party would be in its infancy. So that was the ultimate influence for me. And then watching Reagan do his campaign in 76, even though it was a losing campaign, he spoke to me the way my mama spoke to me, in a weird kind of way. And he made a lot of sense about a lot of things, that were of value to me. For example, I remember asking my mom, after my dad, my birth father, died, why she never went on public assistance. Because the church and her family and friends urged her to go on welfare because she was raising a child by herself, and she had a minimum wage job, but it clearly wasn't enough. And I'll never forget what she told me. She said, well, at that time, I didn't want the government raising my child. Well, that resonated with me. And, I connected dots politically. And Reagan sort of spoke to that idea of self-reliance and what that may mean for the individual. So all these little vignettes in my life sort of lined up politically. But I'll end it this way. When I went and finally told my mother that I decided to join the Republican Party, she looked at me and she said, "Now, why would you go and do that?" I was like, "Because you raised me well, what can I say?"
So you mentioned, though, that this one aunt that nobody spoke to her. Did you experience that with your family when you told them that you decided that the Republican Party was your political home?
Not really, no. I experienced it a little bit with my friends. This was, again, the late 70s. And so there were a whole lot of things going on at that time. But even then, not so much. Boys in high school are boys in high school, so that sort of tells you how those conversations typically went. But for my aunt, it was funny. By the time, so you get to the 76 campaign, by the time a lot of that, it kind of changed for her inside the family. But she would tell me, she's like, in the 50s and 60s, oh no, it was, she had a hard road there to go because, the politics was so stark. The African-American community was moving off of Republicanism. When you had, voices out there like, I guess Nixon to some extent, even though African-Americans really liked Nixon as a president in many respects. But the whole Goldwater narrative around states' rights and the sanctity of the South and all of that crazy really further drove people from the party. So for Black Republicans, it was a particular challenge because you were now, for the first time, you were seeing these individuals getting caught between their identity as African Americans and their politics. And so that narrative still plays itself out to this day, as a matter of fact.
So throughout your career as a public official, you've probably had lots of hateful or threatening messages sent your way, as many elected officials and public officials do. So one question I have for you is if you have any advice for young people who might want to do the work of public service,
Right.
of electoral politics, but who fear being the targets of that kind of vitriol that comes with the territory.
So I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you straight up. I'm not going to mince any words. And this is, as this question is geared towards the young and emerging leaders in our communities. If you don't know who you are, don't get in this game. Don't even pretend you're going to be a elected whatever. You couldn't even do you couldn't do the job of dog catcher well if you don't know who you are and if you're not comfortable with that. You believe what you believe because of your experiences, your knowledge, the information you take in, the things you learn from others. 1, so if you're not comfortable with who you are, don't do it. 2, if you don't know how to do what my mama taught me a long time ago, and I have her quote sitting in front of me on my bookshelf right now as we speak, shut up and listen, right? If you're not prepared to shut your mouth and actually listen to what people around you are saying, you will never learn, and therefore you will never grow, and you will never be that good leader that you want to be. 3, leadership is something everybody knows when they see it. A very interesting and fascinating aspect of leadership for me is, and this is my philosophy, is always be prepared to lead, but never be afraid to follow. Now, what my mama was telling me about following people was following people for the sake of following them, or just kind of blindly going, okay, that's what we're going to do. Let's go do it, right? That's not what leadership is, right? A good leader is always ready to step into that moment and do what she has to do, right? To get through that moment and to help others get through that moment. But a good leader also knows that sometimes that moment isn't for them. That moment is for someone else. And so they then share that leadership. They're prepared to follow someone else's leadership, someone else's example, someone else's idea in that moment. That is quintessential leadership, because guess what? Everyone else around who've been following you, now they know what kind of leader you are. They know they can trust their leadership with you, because you have faith in their leadership, right? And that you are willing to give them in the moment the opportunity to lead. So those are kind of how I would answer that question is looking at those aspects of this and understanding, and if you don't have a clue of who you are and why you are, don't even start. If you got that right, then shut your mouth and pay attention and learn and listen. And when you start doing that, then you know in those moments when you are able to give that leadership example, that leadership opportunity to someone else, and you can follow them in your leadership. And I think you'll go out and you'll start to change the world.
And it also sounds like maybe that if you are comfortable with who you are, then it's easier to withstand the criticism that comes your way.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes, look, I can't even begin to tell you the stuff that's been said about me by a lot of very prominent people that we all know back, not today, but back in the day, when I was coming along. So yeah, I've been called an Uncle Tom. I've been called a Sambo. I've been called this. I've been called that, politically, you're a rhino, all that stupid stuff. Sure. I mean, it will eat you alive. It will eat you alive. But if you know who you are, water off a duck's back, right? Second part of that is put the damn Twitter down. All right. My thing on Twitter and social media, first off, I got off Facebook. That's a whole nother program. But on Twitter, I tweet what I think. I tweet what I believe. I may respond to someone else's tweet. I love having fun with it. It's something fun. I like to make people laugh and enjoy. That's a good. But on the serious stuff, I tweet what I believe. You know what? I'm not really that interested in what you have to say. Why? Because then you get down a hole. So if you call me up saying, well, you're just a stupid MFer and you don't, why am I going to respond to that? I'm not interested in what you have to say there. But if you come back with an intelligent, cogent response, going, well, I understand what you're saying, but I disagree. Okay, I may engage. But the point is, you don't have to respond to everything. Let it go. Let it go, because it will eat you up. It will consume you. And what it ultimately winds up doing, Debbie, is it dictates your behavior. It starts to dictate. I've sat on sets at MSNBC and watched people tweet something out, right, in a segment, and then feverishly in commercial break looking to see what people are saying. I'm like, dude, what the hell's your problem? Put the damn thing down. Who cares? Right? You've stated your opinion. So whatever your opinion is, you're probably prepared to back it up, right? So what are you so worried about? So, that's me. Now, somebody else will have a different approach. I've been known not to play well with others at times. So that's me, because I don't believe in playing the game the way you want me to play it. I don't think I need to be concerned about the things you want me to be concerned about unless it's impacting someone's life, their livelihood, or something like that. Okay, as a public official, yeah, you got to be concerned. But as a private citizen or as someone who is trying to, be a thought leader in some respects, you've got to be a little bit smarter and a little bit wiser about it.
So continuing with this thread of leadership and followership, I imagine you were hoping that there would be more followers when you were an early and vocal Republican critic of Donald Trump. And so can you talk a little bit about what that was like to be criticizing Trump within the party, and seeing that, most of the people within the party who were criticizing him were like you, not in elected office anymore and not pursuing elected office?
Well, I'm a Black Roman Catholic conservative Republican from Washington, D.C. So I kind of know lonely. It's not something that, there's a whole bunch of us. When I go to the meeting, it's probably generally just me and maybe 2 or 3 other folks who happen to be walking by. So it's not something, I don't worry about that. I didn't worry about that. Look, I did not come up into Republican politics the same way most Republicans did. I grew up, as I said, in a Democratic household. I lived in a Democratic city, affectionately known as Chocolate City at the time, where voter registration was 10-1 against me, right? My political mentors were the former mayor of the city, Marion Barry, the first members of the city council appointed by Lyndon Johnson, Joe Yeldell, the first mayor appointed by Lyndon Johnson, Mayor Washington. These were the men Charlene Drew Jarvis, the daughter of Dr. Drew Jarvis, were my mentors and my friends that I grew up with, who taught me about the art of politics. I learned arts of grassroots politics, not from some Republican organization or some consulting firm. I learned it from Marion Barry, who was an incredible grassroots organizer. And I had a lot of doors slammed in my face over the years, but I understood the purpose of doing that. So I never played the game that way, where I was so worried about what people inside the party would think about me. If that were the case, I think they probably would have reelected me. And the reason they didn't, despite all the victories and despite the great wins we had in 2010, is that I was disruptive. I was not there to play nice. My attitude was, you want Black folks in the party, then show your behind up in a Black community, sit down and shut your mouth and listen to what they have to say. If you're not prepared to do that, then you're not serious about Black voters. And I still believe that to this day. So when I criticized Donald Trump, I didn't really care what anybody else inside the party thought about that, because I was sharing my conviction. And I was sharing my voice, just as they were sharing their support, saying, oh yeah, anything Trump wants to do, we're there. I'm like, no, because this is not about one man, nor should it ever be. And it is not about this party. It is about the country I live in. Despite the problems that as a Black man I have with how America has treated us for 400 years, I'll be damned if I'm going to be stupid enough to back what we saw on January 6th, or back disenfranchising African Americans after the fact. So I didn't really care too much about that. It wasn't a concern of mine. I stated my truth. You could agree with it or not. The point of stating my truth was not to get you to agree with me. The point of stating my truth was just that. Going back to what I said before, I know who I am. I'm convicted in that. I've learned enough by listening to my community to understand what's important. I've learned enough by listening to the country. As I've traveled the country, I've been in every state in the union at least 3 times over my political career. So I've listened and I've learned, and I have in the past been willing to share what I've learned and what I've understood with others, and they've shared it with me.
So do you agree with the premise that some people say that there's this crisis within the Republican Party right now, with people like you who are arguing against the direction that Trump took the party, and many Republicans, many elected Republicans, continuing with the messaging and the postures of that Donald Trump took? Does it feel to you as an insider in the party that there's this existential crisis happening within the party?
Oh yeah, very much so. Oh, very much so. Look, we have since January 6th, in the immediate weeks after January 6th, so we're talking about a 3-week window, roughly 30,000 people left the GOP. The last number I saw, which was a few days ago, nationwide, was 150,000 and growing. So the number is still growing. Now you may say, well, that's not a lot. It is at a county level. It is when you're in a county with a certain number of Republicans and a third of them leave. That's a problem. So yeah, it is a growing problem for the GOP. I think we are on a very dangerous road, given the approach that we've taken on voting, which is so disappointing and so frustrating, given where we were in the 50s and 60s, the role that we played in helping create and put in place the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, to now be the party that's advocating for overturning an election because we didn't like the way Black people voted. And that is bluntly how it is. I mean, you can sugarcoat it any way you want, but let me take you to a few neighborhoods and you try to share that sugarcoat with them and see what they tell you. I don't think they would be kind about it. And I don't think you would hear the words, well, that's okay. The reality of it is the party has put itself on a very dangerous path to secure and lock in a shrinking white male vote, number one, a larger white vote, as the country demographically is changing. And I've been advocating for 20 plus years, Debbie, that, we have to recognize where this trend line is going. Remember, I grew up in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia area in DC. I watched and was and warned at the time of what was happening in Virginia. That Northern Virginia was starting to look a lot like Prince George's County, Baltimore City, and Montgomery County here in Maryland. And Republicans in Virginia that I worked with were like, oh, no, that's, no, we're a strong red conservative state. Well, you may be today, but you won't be in 10 years. And lo and behold, guess what? Virginia, check. North Carolina, check. South Carolina's on the bubble. Oh, Georgia, check. Guess what's next? Texas. 2024, mark my words, Texas is a battleground state. And I'll be surprised if the Republicans hold on and keep it. So that's where the party needs to recognize its future is. And if you're not prepared as a party to stop being stupid, which I believe they are right now, and take on a more progressive, and I don't mean that in a political sense, but I mean it in the sense that you look outside, you think outside of the political box you're in, and recognize your circumstances and figure out and adapt to how you change that, you will quickly go the way of the Whigs. And that's the battle and the fight that's going on inside the party right now, despite how some people may want to dress it up.
Well, we hit the timer on my lights, so I'm going to
I see that, yes.
try to get my lights to go back on. But while I'm waving my arms around, this brings me to some questions that I do have about race and politics. And going back to your own story, you made history when you became the first African-American to be elected to statewide office in Maryland, where you served as lieutenant governor. You also broke barriers when you were chosen to be the first African-American chairperson of the Republican National Committee. Can you talk about what that was like and what helped you navigate those firsts? Was it something that really weighed on you, or were you able to assume those roles in it?
Yeah, I think people should I hope they appreciate that being the first at anything is not something you aspire to. I mean, and if you do, guess what? It likely is not going to happen. All right. So just be aware of that. So it's not a course I set out on. To become the lieutenant governor of Maryland, the first African-American elected statewide, the first African-American lieutenant governor, and the first Republican lieutenant governor in the state's history. Same at the RNC. Both those jobs I didn't seek, and to be honest about it, I really didn't want. I sat down with Senator Bill Brock, God bless him, he just passed last week, who headed up Governor Ehrlich's team to look at who would be his running mate for lieutenant governor. I was state party chairman at the time. I spent 4 hours in a meeting with Bill Brock going through a list that I had diligently put together of potential candidates for Bob Ehrlich as his running mate. At the end of those 4 hours, after I'd given him my best sales pitch on at least 3 of them, Bill looks at me and he goes, well, what about you? And I go, well, what about me for what? And he goes, what about you for lieutenant governor? I went, lieutenant governor of what? I was completely blown away. I was like, dude, we just spent 4 hours going through this. What are you talking about? But, so I didn't expect that. For the chairmanship, I had about 6 states contact me and say, hey, and this was in 2006, was the first time there was a potential run when the president was going to make an appointment for chairman, ask if I would put myself in the contention for it. And the same was true in 2008. So for me, it is, I appreciate the honor and the call to service, but it's not something that you seek. And it's certainly not something that you carry easily when you're the first, because when you're the first, there are a lot of pressures that people just don't even begin to appreciate that are put on you. And if you're the first Black anything, oh my God. I mean, it's just an impossible standard. So again, I have to fall back on my training and my experience as a former seminarian, and my philosophy about how I approach life generally, being grounded in who I am, et cetera. Look, I stood on the steps of our state capitol when I was sworn in. And in the moment I was standing there with my hand on the Bible and in the other hand in the air, I was thinking about Kunta Kinte. Why? Well, Kunta Kinte was brought to America as a slave and deposited on the port of Annapolis, which was literally 500 or so yards behind us down the hill in the port of Annapolis. And I'm standing there thinking, from that moment where Kunta Kinte is brought to this country as a slave to this moment where as a Black man, I get to be sworn in as the second highest office holder in the state. Wow. And that's a real weight. And it was made even more so when I got into my office that Monday morning and the state's archivist / historian was there. And he said, I wanted to point out something to you that I think is going to be very important for you to appreciate and understand. I said, what's that? He said, you're in the office of Thomas Jefferson. I said, get out of here. He was like, no, you are. They had actually put in period pieces from the time. People forget, Maryland served as the nation's capital for about 18 months back in the early days of the country's forming. And Thomas Jefferson actually worked in the office, which is now the Lieutenant Governor's office in Maryland, and which later became our state Supreme Court before they actually built the courthouse. And I used to sit in that office and I used to look, and it's a funny story I'll share for another time about a piece of period furniture they had in the office, which I really wanted to sit in and they wouldn't let me sit in it, but that's another story. But we had the drapes and everything was there. And I was sitting in that office and I was thinking to myself, Thomas Jefferson must be asking himself, how the hell did a Black man wind up in my office? And that is the story of this country. And it is a story of Black men and women. And that's an incredible weight, but it is also an incredible story and an incredible opportunity as well. And so I never get bogged down in being the first at anything. I just go in and do the job. I appreciate the moment, the history of it. Okay. But the expectations, going back to what I said before, is still there because people have high expectations, sometimes unreasonable expectations of what you would do in that job. And your best bet is to try to meet your own, not theirs.
Well, I have about two more hours worth of questions, but I want to make sure we have time for questions from our audience. So I'm going to stop asking questions, and we have somebody lined up. Our first question is from Eliza.
Eliza.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak to our community today.
Sure.
My name is Eliza Hilfer. I'm a current MPH student at the Tufts School of Medicine. And you spoke a little bit about the dangerous path on which the GOP is traveling. And I'm curious to know where you generally see the Republican Party going in the next 10 years, and if you think that the two-party system, as we know it, is in danger of fracturing.
So the two-party system, I'll start with that. The two-party system should and needs to fracture. It needs to grow up and mature. We have to appreciate we are 244 years into this experiment. There are other nations that have been around a lot longer than we have, right? And have gone through all of this stuff, all of these cycles and all of these experiences. I think for America right now, we're at a point where this is a fracturing opportunity in a good way, in which more political ideas and thoughts and approaches should be put on the table, not less, not fewer. And I think it's important for us as a country to recognize that we are diverse, not just in the fact that, she's a Hispanic and he's an African-American and they're Asian, but because we also have different experiences and different ideas that have been formed over this time. We are an immigrant nation, except for two groups, Native Americans and African Americans. Everybody else freely came, freely sought the American dream. And the reality of it is that's still an animating spirit and purpose here. And I think politically, that creates an opportunity for people to begin to push up against the political system. So yes, a third or fourth party should form. Does that happen now? I don't know, but the polling seems to indicate a lot more people are looking and thinking that way. With respect to the Republican Party, yeah, they got a fracture problem. And unless they jettison, I think, the baggage of the last 4 years, the baggage of fine people on both sides, the baggage of S-hole countries, and the baggage of kids in cages, which ironically enough for Joe Biden is an issue that he still has to contend with. The party has to figure out how it's going to speak to this new America. And I don't know they're willing to do that. Look, we can't help anyone who doesn't want to be helped, right? Whether they suffer from addiction or whether they suffer from a health malady where there is obvious help for them and they refuse that help, there's only so much you can do. The party refuses to recognize what's going on around it. So there's only so much the rest of us can do who are trying to help it heal and move forward, and reestablish those ideas that resonated with a lot of Americans at one point. If it doesn't want to do that, then that's on them, and we'll see where they wind up. But I think while that's happening, you're going to see some other things emerge, which will be equally, if not more exciting.
All right, our next question comes from Jeff.
Hi.
Hey, Jeff.
My name's Jeff. Hi. My name's Jeff Gingold. I'm a proud graduate of Tufts College of Arts and Sciences, class of 1967.
Wow.
I have a very simple question for you. Will Donald Trump be the Republican Party's presidential candidate in 2024?
So good question. My bet is he is not going to be the Republican nominee, but he will have a lot to say about who is. I think people should, at least I hope people appreciate that what Trump is doing is setting up a way to maintain control and influence over the party by putting out there, yeah, I think I may run in 2024. What does that do? And we've seen it already. It starts to freeze the field. Everybody is now cautiously talking about what they may do. And they're certainly being very cautious about what they say about Trump, because that was the end game anyway. Trump didn't want, on the back end of his presidency, all of these folks now who want to be president come out and go, oh, well, that was oh man, I'm glad we're done with that stupid. Let's not do that anymore. That was crazy. Trump was bad for his ego is that sensitive, but he's also that creatively smart to think ahead, to figure out how to block and tackle his opponents, to put them in a defensive crouch for no reason. So I don't think Trump will be the Republican nominee because I don't think Trump will run. Now, unless Trump presents me with evidence that says he intends to run, seriously intends to run, if he runs, he will likely be the nominee. But I don't think he gets there. I think what he does is he holds that ground, and he'll hold that ground to see what happens in 2022. If the Republicans take back the House and the Senate, and they're more likely to take back the House at this point than anything else, he's going to claim credit for that. And that will then begin to juice that system for him. And he will use that. See, I got it back for you. See, but if they lose for more seats and the Democrats gain additional seats, especially in the Senate, then he's got the escape hatch, and he can sort of continue to play the kingmaker role, whether for his son or some other person he wants tonight. But doesn't have to expose himself to another run. He's too lazy to run again. So that in and of itself says enough to me that he's not going to do it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we have Timothy.
Oh, hi.
Hey.
I just said, I'm really honored to actually meet you for a number of reasons. A little bit about my background. I am a Black Roman Catholic from East New York, and my aunt actually used to work for Congressman Ed Town. So we were a fiercely Democratic party, and everyone was shocked when I got my little postcard in saying what party I wanted to do. They were all shocked when I chose Republican, and they all just thought I was messing with them. And I was just like, no, I'm serious. I mean, I look at everyone around me. If you're a crack academic, you're all broke. You're all Democrats, no offense. So I figured I would just try going another direction. I found a lot of inspiration in terms of like the words of Ronald Reagan, even with George Bush in certain ones. I found a lot of inspiration in them. So I was kind of wondering who within the party today actually inspires you to go forward and to pursue, despite what we see happening with Donald Trump.
It's interesting. That's a very, very good question. And it's a very difficult question. There aren't, leadership to me, again, going back to that, it is such a valuable quality, such an important quality. And I wish more asserted it. One other aspect of leadership I did not touch on, but it is very, very important, is what are you willing to sacrifice? So the answer to the question is, who do I see sacrificing their seat, ready, prepared to lose their seat in the Senate or the House, prepared to lose their committee assignments? And I don't see a lot. Adam Kinzinger comes to mind. I have a great deal of respect for Adam, and helped him get elected back in 2010. Liz Cheney, because I've known the Cheney family for a long time, and just watched her grow, and the stance that she took. I think people really underappreciate how difficult that was for her as the number 3 in the House leadership to take the role position that she took on impeachment and certainly post January 6th. So now I'm kind of waiting to see how she uses it. I've been on Twitter at times touting her as the next Speaker of the House, and I think she should be. But that's me, one person. Mitt Romney is someone I've known and worked with in the past, supported his presidential bid. He was supportive of my efforts when I was chairman, and watching him kind of stake his ground. And of course, guys like John McCain, obviously, God rest him, were towering figures in the party. That, look, you can play the partisan game, Timothy. We can all do that, but you got to figure out when it's time to turn it off and get down to business, so that, if you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, or I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat, we can get into a fight over policy, and we can have that big battle, and then hash it out, because I'm going to put something on the table that's going to challenge what you're going to do, and you're going to put something on the table to challenge what I want to do. Right now, unfortunately, my party is, our party's not putting anything on the table. What's our infrastructure plan? Right? You don't like the $2 trillion that the president has proposed. What are you proposing? You didn't like the COVID relief package. Okay, fine, respect that. Tell me what you would take out. Tell me what your relief package would look like. And do you take into account these other things that you're not including? And could you tell me why you wouldn't include money for the states, for example? So those are the types of debates I'd like to see the party move back into. And it's going to take men and women inside and outside the party political structure, but especially those who have title inside the structure, to kind of move in that direction and risk something, risk your seat, risk your reelection, to make the bigger and more important point that these ideas, these principles, these policies have resonance, and we're going to fight for them, and we're going to articulate them, and we're going to present you to them, Democrats, to you Democrats, and we want to have a debate about why ours are better or yours are better.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. I just also want to add, when I got into Tufts University, I was the only African-American engineer that got accepted into my class. So wow. I definitely understand what you're saying about the first and in certain cases only, and not rather not aspiring to that, but finding that in a position. And it's such a pleasure to meet someone who actually, who I can actually relate to.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I wish you the best, and keep trailblazing, baby. Keep trailblazing. But more importantly, don't forget to do that one thing that's important. At some point, reach back and bring somebody else forward. So really appreciate it.
All right. Okay, thank you.
All right, next we have Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello. Hi, Mr. Steele. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's an honor.
Sure.
Also, hi, Professor Schildkraut. My name is Sarah. I'm a junior studying political science. My question has to do with your work at MSNBC.
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate holding minority conservative opinions on a majority liberal news source? Given that, what have been some of the more contested or intriguing debates that you've had?
Good question. Lots of coffee and an occasional shot of bourbon. So yeah, it's a different space. So quick story, I got approached by MSNBC right after I left the RNC. Phil Griffin, who was then head of MSNBC, reached out and said, "Hey, I just want to do some counter programming. You're the perfect guy to do it with." And he said, "I think our audience will like you. You're gonna piss them off enough, but not too much." And so we kind of started this association. This is my 10th year now at the network. Unfortunately, the last 5 years have been largely talking about something other than policy. Although now we're going to get back into that space. I kind of threw down a couple of times on the XL pipeline, which I thought the Biden administration rushed to judgment on that. And now we'll see how things kind of play out on infrastructure, because at the end of the day, that's going to be a $4 trillion package. And unlike my friends in the House and Senate, I care about debts and deficits, whether we're in power or out of power, because guess who gets to pay for them? You do. And so some of the big debates that I've had on the air was during the Obama years on Obamacare, because remember, I came in to the network after having campaigned very vocally against the president's initiative as RNC chairman, and did a national tour on a red bus trying to get Nancy Pelosi fired, which we did at the time. And I'd tell you, Nancy and I have mad respect for each other. And she's a Baltimore girl through and through, even though she's now living on the West Coast. Yeah, I don't know what that's all about, but that's all right. We'll forgive her. Around those big policy issues, particularly healthcare was one of the ones where you find yourself, kind of pushing up against the narrative at the time, which of course was, they were advocating, some of the folks on the air were advocating a much more, even more progressive healthcare policy than what Obama had proposed. And of course, they loved pointing out that Obamacare was nothing more than Romney Care, which was nothing more than the heritage healthcare plan from the days of Bill Clinton. And I would always take that and say, yeah, you're absolutely right. And we realized the error of our ways, kind of deal. And we'd be off to the races. But I missed that, and looking forward to it in the Biden era. In fact, when I had a conversation with the president before he became president for the election, I told him that yes, I wanted to let him know I was endorsing him and supporting him, but don't get it twisted. You come out of the gates with some half-cocked crazy stuff on the Green New Deal and healthcare and all that. I said, I will be a very vocal opponent. And he laughed and he said, I wouldn't expect it any other way. And that's what I respect about Joe, is that he, as a former creature of the Senate, he appreciates the art of the debate of ideas, debate of policy. And I think he's going to have some success, particularly in the infrastructure point, which I'm sure we started debating it this past week on the network. And so it'll be interesting to see how the narrative shifts and changes. And a lot of that will be how the president puts that policy out there. We didn't have the president really pushing policy during the Trump era. We kept waiting for an infrastructure plan because every week was infrastructure week, but nothing ever materialized to really go toe to toe over. So we'll see how it plays out.
So with the few minutes that we have left, I'm just going to summarize some of the questions that are coming up. And so what are your thoughts on what the future is for the Republican Party with respect to African American voters? How you've already touched on this a little bit, but in terms of diversifying the base, in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of age, young people now are constituting the greatest block of voters, and young people identify primarily, overwhelmingly, as Democrats and progressives. So what strategies, what opportunities are there for the Republican Party there?
You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to get your hands in the political dirt. You've got to touch and feel the soil that, minority, soon to be majority communities walk on. You just do. And if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to make the changes necessary, if you're not willing to jettison fake populism, white nationalism, the Proud Boys, find people on both sides, saying to Black folks, yeah, Black unemployment was the lowest it ever was under Donald Trump, ain't gonna mean squat. Because unless you can address what we see unfolding right now in the Chauvin trial, unless you can get behind and understand the angst around Black Lives Matter and why it came into being in the first place. It wasn't just about taking a knee. It was so much more than that. And if you don't understand what the 10 and 2 conversation is in every Black household that has a young boy in it, then you haven't begun to scratch the surface of the walk that African Americans have been walking for 400 years. And you would think the party, as some Republicans like to tout, freed the slaves, would have a better appreciation of that. But that's now just become a tagline, a throwaway line that means nothing in the face of what we see still going on in communities around the country. And the way the country as a whole is addressing issues on race. And that is not helped when one political party has decided to side with the Proud Boys over proud Americans. And
do you have any sense of optimism that the party will do the things that you're suggesting at some point?
Not at this moment.
Not at this moment.
Not at this moment. Again, I'm waiting for the leader to make the sacrifice to do the course correct. I was hoping that Senator Flake was that person, and he left. And I told him, "Don't leave, stay, fight, stay." But he left, and there have been others who've since left. I have a lot of hope in Adam Kinzinger if he can get reelected next year, and we'll see. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I always tell my students that election years that end in 2 are always really strange because of all the redistricting that happens on top of all the unusual political events happening at our current time. So it's going to be a most unusual election ending in a 2.
Yes, so true.
Well, we are at 6:30, so that is our time. As I said, I could have done this for much, much longer, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
No, Debbie, this has been a real treat. Thank you very much. And thank you to the entire Tufts community, and certainly to the student body and those who participated this evening. Thank you so much.
Michael, can you hear me?
I can, Alan. Thank you.
You can't see me, but I just wanted to first of all, I want to thank my colleague and friend Debbie for a great conversation. And thank you, Michael. Check your chat if you would. But thank you very much. This was a really enjoyable conversation, and we all appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, it's my pleasure. And, I wish everybody the best. Stay safe, take the vaccine, and wear the mask.